I canceled my knee replacement surgery. A surgery I had waited 18 agonizing months for, to babysit my grandchildren so my son and his wife could go on a luxury networking trip. My thank you was to be called lazy by the very son whose life I had built with 40 years of backbreaking labor. He thought his mother, who had sacrificed her own body for his future, was now a useless burden. But he forgot that the woman who taught him how to read was also the woman who taught herself how to run a business, balance the books, and sign the paychecks. And I was about to give him one final, very expensive lesson. Before I begin, thank you for being here. For being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman knowing her own worth and demanding its value, you are in the right place. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. Now let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Esther Mae Washington, and at 68 years old, my life was measured in two distinct ways. By the endless, deep throb in my left knee, and by the fierce, boundless pride I felt for my son, David. The two were inextricably linked. The pride was the harvest. The pain was the price of the seed. I lived in Beaufort, South Carolina, in the very house my late husband Samuel and I had bought when David was just a boy. It was a proper low-country home, painted a gentle haint blue to ward off the spirits, with a wide, welcoming porch and a garden overflowing with azaleas and camellias. From the outside it was a picture of serene southern retirement. But inside, every step was a negotiation. Every morning began with a stiff, grinding protest from the joint that had carried me through 4 decades of standing, lifting, and kneading. For 41 years I was the heart and soul of Esther's Sweet Blessings, a bakery that became a Beaufort institution. I wasn't just a baker, I was a custodian of memories. My hands, now gnarled with arthritis but still possessing their innate wisdom, crafted the wedding cakes for 3 generations of local brides. My sweet potato pies were the stuff of legend, the centerpiece of countless Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. The bakery wasn't just a business, it was my life's work, my ministry. It was built on pre-dawn mornings, on wrestling 50-pound sacks of flour, on standing for 16 hours a day on unforgiving concrete floors. It was that relentless, loving labor that had ground the cartilage in my knee down to nothing. But it was also that labor that had paid for everything. Specifically, it had paid for David. My brilliant, beautiful boy. Samuel had passed when David was only 12, leaving me to raise him alone. From that day forward, every ounce of my energy, every dollar I earned, was funneled into his future. He was going to have the life I never could, the opportunities that were fenced off from me. He had a mind as sharp as a tack and he set his sights high. First, a bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Then the impossible dream. Law school at Wake Forest University. The tuition fees were astronomical, numbers that seemed more like telephone numbers than actual costs. But I never flinched. I took out a second mortgage on my home. I sold Samuel's beloved fishing boat. I worked weekends, holidays, my own birthdays. I poured every last drop of myself into the foundation of his success, and when he graduated magna cum laude and accepted a position as a junior associate at a prestigious corporate law firm in Charlotte, the pride I felt was so immense it almost eclipsed the pain in my knee. Almost. 5 years ago I had finally sold the bakery. The sale left me with a comfortable nest egg, enough to live on without worry. My first act of retirement was to see a specialist at the MUSC Health University Medical Center down in Charleston. The diagnosis was swift and unsurprising: bone-on-bone osteoarthritis. The solution was a total knee replacement. "It will give you your life back, Mrs. Washington," the doctor had said kindly. But the waiting list was long. So I waited. For 18 months I waited, my world shrinking with each passing season. I marked the days off on my calendar, dreaming of the simple freedom of walking through my garden without wincing, of climbing the stairs to my bedroom without pulling myself up by the banister. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks before my scheduled surgery. It was David. "Mama," he said, his voice bright and full of the practiced charm he used in the courtroom. "How's my favorite girl?" "I'm your only girl, son," I chuckled, settling into my porch swing, the familiar creak of comfort. "I'm doing all right. Just counting down the days." That's great," he said quickly. Then the telltale shift in his tone. The slight hesitation that always preceded a request. "Listen, Mama, something has come up. Something huge for my career. The firm is having its annual partners retreat at the sanctuary on Kiowa Island. It's a massive networking opportunity. Tiffany and I have to be there. I could hear Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, in the background. Her voice was a high, sharp counterpoint to David's smooth baritone. Tiffany was ambitious. She viewed life in Charlotte as a ladder, and she was determined to climb it, dragging David up with her. She was obsessed with appearances, with their oversized modern farmhouse in the wealthy Myers Park neighborhood, with their 2 children, 4-year-old Maya and 6-year-old Noah, being in the right preschools and summer camps. The problem is, Mama, David continued, it's for 2 full weeks. And we've been completely let down by our nanny. She just quit on us. Can you believe it? No notice. A cold knot began to form in my stomach. I knew where this was going. We are in a terrible bind, he said, laying the final brick of his argument. We need you, Mama. We need you to come up to Charlotte and watch the kids. It would be a lifesaver. An absolute lifesaver. The air went out of my lungs. David, I said, my voice quiet. My surgery. It's in 3 weeks. I have pre-op appointments. I have to prepare. There was a pause. I heard Tiffany whisper something sharp and urgent to him. David cleared his throat. Mama, I know. I know it's a big ask. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. Making partner could change everything for us. For the kids. We can just reschedule the surgery. It's not urgent, right? You've been dealing with it for years. Not urgent. The words landed like a slap. For him, my pain was a chronic, manageable inconvenience. A background noise in the symphony of his important life. For me, it was a prison. Please, Mama, he begged, his voice softening into the little boy tone that had always been my undoing. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't a complete emergency. We'll make it up to you, I promise. We'll do something huge for you when we get back. I looked out at my garden, at the vibrant pink azaleas I longed to tend to without this searing pain. I thought of the doctor's promise. It will give you your life back. Then I looked at the framed photo of David on my side table, his proud, smiling face in his cap and gown. I had never said no to him. My entire life had been a series of yes. Yes to the extra shifts. Yes to the second mortgage. Yes to my own dreams being deferred again and again. My role, as I had always seen it, was to be the sturdy, reliable foundation upon which he could build his magnificent life. A foundation doesn't complain. It simply bears the weight. With a sigh that felt like it was pulled from the deepest part of my soul, I gave the answer I always had. All right, David. I'll do it. The relief in his voice was immediate and effusive. Oh, Mama, thank you. You're the best. You are an absolute saint. After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, the silence of my quiet street pressing in on me. The joy and anticipation that had been my constant companions for months had evaporated, replaced by a familiar, heavy resignation. With a hand that trembled slightly, I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over the number for the MUSC orthopedic department. It felt like I was dialing the number to my own prison warden, asking to extend my sentence. With a deep breath, I made the call, my voice betraying no emotion as I explained that I needed to postpone my surgery. Indefinitely. The foundation had to hold. It always had to hold. The drive from Beaufort to Charlotte is just under 4 hours, but on that Monday morning, it felt like a journey into a foreign land. Each mile I put between myself and the quiet, comforting familiarity of my low-country home was a mile deeper into a world where I felt increasingly out of place. My knee, a cruel and accurate barometer of my stress, throbbed with a dull, insistent rhythm that seemed to keep time with the hum of the tires on I-77. I had packed a small suitcase, my Bible, and a large bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. I was armed for a mission of love, but my body felt like it was preparing for a war it had already lost. Pulling into the Myers Park neighborhood was always a culture shock. The old, graceful homes of Beaufort, with their deep porches and sprawling live oaks draped in Spanish moss, were replaced by towering, brand-new mansions that crowded their lots, each one a monument to its owner's success. David and Tiffany's home was one of the newest. A stark white modern farmhouse, with black trim and a front door painted a jarring shade of lime green. It was a house designed not for living but for being photographed. It had no soul. I parked my sensible 10-year-old Buick behind Tiffany's gleaming white Range Rover, the contrast a perfect metaphor for our two lives. Before I could even kill the engine, the front door flew open. Tiffany stood there, already dressed for travel in expensive-looking athletic wear, her phone pressed to her ear. She gave me a tight, fleeting smile and a little wave before turning her attention back to her call. David rushed out to greet me, giving me a quick one-armed hug that smelled of expensive cologne. "Mama, you're a lifesaver," he said, grabbing my suitcase. "We're running so late. Our flight to Charleston boards in 2 hours." He hustled me inside. The house was, as always, immaculately clean and aggressively minimalist. White walls, white furniture with occasional pops of color from abstract art that looked to me like a series of expensive paint spills. The children, Maya and Noah, came running to give me clumsy, enthusiastic hugs, their small bodies a brief, welcome moment of warmth in the cold, sterile environment. Tiffany clicked off her phone, her face a mask of stress deficiency. "Esther, thank you so much for doing this," she said, her tone suggesting she was bestowing a great honor upon me. "I've left a schedule on the kitchen island. It has everything you need. The kids' activities, their dietary restrictions, the Wi-Fi password, emergency contacts. I've also typed up the cleaning protocols for the housekeepers, but if you could just make sure you stick to them in the interim, that would be great. We like to maintain a certain standard." She gestured toward a stack of 5 neatly printed pages held together with a gold paperclip. "Cleaning protocols? I was here to care for my grandchildren, not to be a temporary custodian for her showroom." But I simply nodded, the first of many indignities I would swallow that week. They were gone in a blur of designer luggage and last-minute instructions. "Be good for Grandma." David called over his shoulder, and then the lime green door clicked shut, leaving me in the echoing silence of their perfect house. The silence was soon broken by the needs of 2 small children and the screaming protest of my own body. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell, a relentless marathon of childcare fueled by caffeine and painkillers. Tiffany's schedule was less of a guide and more of a military itinerary. Mornings were a frantic rush of gluten-free waffles, packing organic snacks, and getting the children to their respective educational enrichment camps. Afternoons were a whirlwind of karate lessons, ballet classes, and playdates with the children of Tiffany's equally ambitious friends. In between, there were mountains of laundry, tiny clothes stained with grass and paint, and the constant tidying required to meet the standard of the house. I cooked, I cleaned, I read stories, I kissed scraped knees. And with every step, every time I bent down to pick up a toy, every trip up and down their polished hardwood stairs, my knee screamed. The pain was a living entity. It started as a dull throb in the morning and escalated to a sharp, searing fire by evening. I found myself leaning on furniture to get around, planning my routes through the house to minimize steps. I would sit on the floor to play with the children, but the act of getting back up was a 10-minute agonizing ordeal. At night, after the children were asleep, I would collapse onto the bed in the guest room, a room so devoid of personal touches it felt like a hotel, and elevate my swollen knee on a stack of decorative pillows, my eyes welling with tears of sheer exhaustion and pain. I was living on Tylenol, washing the pills down with lukewarm water because I couldn't manage the stairs one more time to get ice from the kitchen. I felt the profound, bitter irony of it all. I had postponed the very surgery that would have ended this suffering, only to be plunged into a situation that made it 1,000 times worse. I was sacrificing my body on the altar of their convenience. The day they were due to return, I felt a sense of relief so profound it was almost dizzying. I spent the day cleaning the house to a state that even Tiffany couldn't criticize. I bathed the children, dressed them in the outfits she had laid out, and prepared a simple home-cooked meal of roasted chicken and vegetables. A taste of real, comforting food in this house of pre-packaged organic snacks. I wanted to welcome them home with love, to show them that their family had been cared for. They walked in just after 6 o'clock, tanned and glowing from 2 weeks at a 5-star resort on Kiowa Island. They brought with them the scent of salt air and entitlement. They gave the children quick hugs and then immediately began recounting tales of their trip. The infinity pool, the celebrity chef restaurant, the important partner from the firm they had impressed on the golf course. They didn't ask me how I was. They didn't ask about my knee. They didn't even seem to notice the limp that was now so pronounced I could no longer hide it. I served dinner, my hands trembling slightly from the effort of carrying the plates from the kitchen. Tiffany picked at her chicken, a small frown on her perfectly made-up face. "This is nice, Esther," she said, "but you know I don't like the kids eating chicken skin. It's empty calories." I felt a familiar sting of criticism but said nothing. Later, as I was clearing the table, hobbling back and forth to the kitchen, Tiffany stopped me, her finger pointing to a small, almost invisible smudge on the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Oh, it must be a fingerprint from one of the children," I said wearily. "I'll wipe it down." She sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. This is a new appliance, Esther. We have to take care of our things." She turned to David, who had been scrolling through photos on his phone, oblivious. "David, this is what I'm talking about. The lack of attention to detail." That was the spark. David looked up, his face a mask of irritation. He didn't see his mother, who had been in agony for 2 weeks for his sake. He saw a problem, an interruption to his perfect post-vacation bliss. He stood up and walked over to me as I stood by the sink, my back to him, my weight shifted entirely onto my good leg. "Mama," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any warmth. "We leave you here for 2 weeks in our home and we come back to complaints in a messy kitchen. Tiffany and I work ourselves to the bone for this lifestyle. We bust our tails every single day. The least you could do is pull your own weight while you're here. We can't afford for you to be lazy." The word hung in the air. Lazy. It struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was so absurd, so profoundly, cruelly untrue that for a moment I couldn't breathe. My entire life, every sacrifice, every pre-dawn hour, every drop of sweat, every searing pain in my knee, all of it was erased in that single monstrous word. He hadn't just insulted me. He had negated my entire existence. I turned slowly from the sink to face him. I looked at my son, at his handsome, ungrateful face, at the expensive watch on his wrist that my labor had paid for. I looked at his wife, who was watching with a small, triumphant smirk. In that moment, the boundless, unconditional love I had felt for him my entire life began to curdle. It cooled, hardened, and then cracked. And through the cracks, something new and terrifyingly clear began to emerge. It was the chilling realization that the foundation I had spent my life building was being used as a doormat. And the foundation was being treated like dirt. There was no grand explosion. No shouting match. The cruelty of the word lazy was so absolute it defied a verbal response. It was a verdict, delivered by a judge who was also my son, in a courtroom I had paid to build. I simply stood there by the gleaming, smudge-free sink, and felt the last vestiges of warmth drain from me, leaving behind a cold, hollow space. I looked at David, my child, and saw a stranger. A man so blinded by the glitter of his new life that he could no longer see the woman whose back he had stood on to reach it. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. My limp, which I had tried so hard to minimize, was now a pronounced dragging gait. Each step was a testament to the lie he had just told. Each throb of my knee was a hammer blow, forging my shock and grief into something else. Something harder. I made my way up the long, polished staircase, my hand gripping the railing like a lifeline. I retreated to the guest room, the pristine, impersonal space that had been my cell for the past 2 weeks, and closed the door. The click of the latch felt like the closing of a chapter. A final, definitive end to the story of the mother who would do anything for her son. I did not cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a wound to the soul, a fundamental reassessment of my life's purpose. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the roaring in my ears. Lazy. The word echoed, ricocheted off the bare walls. Me. Esther Mae Washington. The woman who had woken up at 4 a.m. for 40 years. The woman who had wrestled dough, frosted cakes, and scrubbed floors until her hands were raw and her back was permanently bowed. The woman who had just spent 336 consecutive hours as an unpaid nanny, chef, and housekeeper, all while enduring a level of physical pain that would have sent a younger person to the emergency room. Lazy. My eyes scanned the room, searching for something to hold on to, some piece of reality in this nightmare of ingratitude. And then I saw it. On the minimalist white bookshelf, tucked between a book on Scandinavian design and a scented candle that cost more than my weekly grocery bill, was a small, framed award. It was from the Beaufort Chamber of Commerce, dated 10 years prior. A simple, elegant plaque with a brass plate that read, Esther Mae Washington, Esther's Sweet Blessings. Small Business Owner of the Year. David had taken it from my house years ago, claiming he wanted something to inspire him in his home office. But here it was, relegated to the guest room, a decorative afterthought. a quaint little relic from his mother's simple, provincial life. I hobbled over to the bookshelf and took the frame in my hands. The weight of it, the cool, smooth wood, was grounding. I stared at my own name etched in brass. Esther Mae Washington. Proprietor. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just a grandmother. I had been a boss. A business owner. A respected member of my community. I had managed inventory, negotiated with suppliers, handled payroll, and paid taxes. I had built an enterprise from flour, sugar, and sheer force of will. My work had value. It had a price. It was quantifiable. And in that moment, sitting in the sterile guest room of my son's house, the house my sacrifice had helped secure, a profound and permanent shift occurred within me. The grief that had hollowed me out began to fill with a cold, clear, righteous anger. It was the anger of a professional who had been devalued. The fury of a contractor whose work had been dismissed. They had treated me not as a loving mother, but as a free, convenient utility. An appliance you expect to work without complaint and then scold when it shows a sign of wear. A thought, sharp and brilliant, cut through the fog of my pain. They thought they retired me. They didn't know I was just getting incorporated. The idea was so audacious, so radical, that it sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated energy through me. The weariness in my bones, the fog of pain and sorrow began to dissipate, replaced by a crystalline, diamond-hard resolve. I was no longer a victim in their story. I was about to become the protagonist of my own. My mind, once clouded with hurt, was now a machine of cold, clear logic. What would a professional do when their services were rendered but their value was insulted? They would cease to provide those services. And they would submit an invoice. My hands, which had been trembling with shock, were now steady. I reached for my handbag and pulled out my smartphone, the screen a bright beacon in the dimming room. I ignored the text from David, a half-hearted "Mama, you okay?" that had come through 20 minutes after his insult. I did not want his apology. An apology was a balm for a personal wound. This was no longer personal. This was business. My fingers, stiff with arthritis, moved with a newfound purpose across the screen. I opened the web browser. I did not search for articles on ungrateful children or family disputes. I searched for top family law attorneys, Charlotte, North Carolina. The list was long, filled with smiling men in dark suits, their firms' names a jumble of prestigious-sounding surnames. I scrolled past them looking for something specific, though I didn't know what it was until I saw it. It was a smaller boutique firm. Okoro Law Group. The photo on the website was not of a man in a suit. It was of a black woman, her hair in elegant, silver-streaked locks, her expression a perfect blend of compassion and no-nonsense intelligence. Her name was Adana Okoro. Her bio was concise and powerful. She was a graduate of Howard University School of Law and specialized in domestic contracts and financial justice, with a particular focus on elder advocacy. Her firm's tagline was printed beneath her name, "Your value is not negotiable." I stared at the words on the screen. Your value is not negotiable. It was a message from the universe. A sign. This woman, this Ms. Adana Okoro, did not see cases like mine as messy family squabbles. She saw them as matters of contract, of value, of justice. She spoke my newfound language. I saved the website to my phone. I took a screenshot of the contact information. The business card of Augusta Blackwood's story was a physical object. Mine was a digital file, but it felt just as solid, just as powerful in my hand. It was a key. It was a weapon. I stood up, my knees still aching, but my posture was different. My spine was straight. My shoulders were back. I was no longer Esther Mae Washington, the wounded mother. I was Esther Mae Washington, the prospective client. I would not cause a scene. I would not engage in a shouting match. I would do what I had always done. I would work. I would prepare. I would build my case with the same meticulous care I had once used to build a 5-tiered wedding cake. And then when the time was right, I would present the bill. The next morning, I rose before the sun just as I had done for most of my adult life. The house was still and silent. I showered, dressed, and packed my small suitcase with a quiet, deliberate efficiency. There was no anger in my movements. No trace of the emotional storm from the night before. There was only a calm, focused purpose. I was a woman on a mission, and the first step was a strategic retreat. I left a short, simple note on the gleaming white quartz of the kitchen island. It read, Dear David and Tiffany, I have returned home to Beaufort to prepare for my upcoming surgery. The children are fine. Esther. I did not sign it Mama, or Love Mom. I signed it with my name, the name that was on the deed to my house, the name that had been on the sign of my bakery, the name that would soon be on the letterhead of a legal document. It was a small act, but it was a declaration of my new formal status. I was on the road before they woke up, my old Buick a silent vessel carrying me away from the scene of my humiliation and toward the seat of my power. The 4-hour drive back to Beaufort was not a journey of sorrow. It was a period of intense, focused planning. With each mile that passed, the cold, sterile world of Myers Park receded, and the warm, dignified world I had built for myself came into sharper focus. My anger was no longer a hot, emotional blaze. It had been channeled into a cool, controlled burn, fueling the engine of my resolve. I arrived home to the comforting embrace of my haint blue house. The air smelled of salt marsh and jasmine. I walked through my front door and felt the profound difference between a house and a home. A house is a structure of walls and windows. A home is a fortress built of love, respect, and memory. For the first time in 2 weeks I felt safe. I felt seen. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to myself. I picked up the phone and dialed the MUSC orthopedic department in Charleston. When the scheduler answered, my voice was firm and clear. Good morning, I said. My name is Esther Mae Washington. I called last month to postpone my knee replacement surgery. I would like to reschedule it for the earliest possible date. There was a pause, the sound of typing, and then the scheduler's voice returned, full of sympathy. Mrs. Washington, it looks like we had a cancellation. We can get you in 10 days from now. Would that work? Tears pricked my eyes, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief and reclamation. Yes, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Yes, that would be perfect. Thank you. Hanging up the phone, I felt as though I had just signed my own Declaration of Independence. I had prioritized my own health, my own well-being. I had taken back my life. It was the first, most important victory. Now I was ready for the second. I sat at the small antique desk in my living room, the one that had belonged to my Samuel. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and pulled up the website for the Okoro Law Group. I dialed the number. I was not calling as a hysterical, wronged mother. I was calling as Esther Mae Washington, proprietor, a woman with a clear and quantifiable grievance. A calm, professional voice answered. Okoro Law Group, how may I help you? Good morning, I began, my voice steady, infused with the formal cadence I had perfected over a lifetime. I would like to schedule a consultation with Ms. Adana Okoro regarding a domestic contract and services rendered. I was given an appointment for a video consultation the very next afternoon. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I didn't just stew in my anger. I channeled it into data. I went through my old calendars, my photo albums, my bank statements. I began to calculate. For the past 6 years since my grandson Noah was born, I had been the default on-call babysitter. Every school holiday, every teacher workday, every time their nanny took a vacation, every weekend they wanted to go out of town. The hours were staggering. I created a spreadsheet, my old business acumen returning as if it had never left. I listed dates, hours, and specific duties performed. I was not just watching the kids. I was providing professional childcare, housekeeping, and culinary services. The next afternoon when I logged onto the video call, I was ready. Adana Okoro appeared on my screen, and she was exactly as her photo had promised. Sharp, intelligent, and exuding an aura of unshakable competence. She listened, truly listened, as I laid out my story. I did not present it as a tale of a mother's heartbreak. I presented it as a business arrangement gone wrong. For 6 years, Ms. Okoro, I explained, I have provided childcare services to my son and his wife on a consistent, recurring basis, allowing them both to advance their careers. This arrangement, though verbal, constituted an ongoing contract. 2 weeks ago, I was induced to cancel a necessary medical procedure to provide emergency round-the-clock services. Upon completion of these services, I was not compensated. Instead, my work was devalued, and my character was defamed with the term lazy. I watched her expression as I spoke. There was no pity in her eyes. There was respect. There was recognition. She saw me not as a poor old mother but as a professional colleague. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, her fingers steepled under her chin. Mrs. Washington, she said, her voice a rich, resonant alto. You are absolutely correct. What you have described is a classic case of quantum merit. It is a Latin term that means, as much as he has deserved. The law recognizes that when one party provides a service to another, they are entitled to reasonable compensation, even in the absence of a written contract. Your years of service created a clear expectation of reliance. They relied on you, and you are entitled to the fair market value of your labor. She then asked me a series of sharp, insightful questions. What was the going rate for a professional nanny in the 28207 zip code? What was the cost of overnight care? Did my duties include housekeeping, meal preparation, transportation? With each question I provided the data from my spreadsheet. And the surgery, Mrs. Washington, she continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. Your postponement likely caused you additional pain and suffering, and potentially a worse medical outcome. We can quantify that as well. That constitutes damages. By the end of the hour-long consultation we had a plan. It was not a lawsuit, not yet. It was, as I had envisioned, an invoice. But it would be an invoice with the full weight and authority of the law behind it. Ms. Okoro would draft it on her firm's letterhead. It would be delivered via certified mail, requiring a signature. It would be a document they could not ignore. We spent the next 2 days refining it. Ms. Okoro's paralegal did the research, confirming the going rates for every service I had provided. The final document was a masterpiece of cold, hard financial retribution. It detailed 1,980 hours of childcare over 6 years. It listed housekeeping services. It included a premium for overnight stays. And at the bottom, it included a separate line item: damages resulting from the medically unadvised postponement of a necessary surgical procedure. The grand total was $48,500. Looking at the number on the screen, I felt a tremor of fear. It was so much. It was so aggressive. But then I looked at my swollen knee. I thought of the word lazy. And my fear was replaced by a profound sense of rightness. This was not a punishment. It was a valuation. It was the price tag for my time, my labor, my body, and my dignity. It was the bill for my love, converted into the only language my son and his wife seemed to understand, the language of money. Send it, I said to Ms. Okoro, my voice firm. Let's send the bill. The invoice was sent on a Wednesday. According to the tracking information Ms. Okoro provided, the certified letter arrived at the pristine modern farmhouse in Myers Park on Friday afternoon. I imagined the scene with a cinematic clarity. The mail carrier walking up the perfectly manicured path, the lime green door opening, Tiffany signing for the envelope with an air of annoyance, thinking it was some boring legal document for David's work. I pictured them opening it together, their faces shifting from curiosity to confusion, and then to pure unadulterated horror as they scanned the itemized list of my life's work, culminating in the staggering figure at the bottom: $48,500. For 2 days there was only silence. It was a heavy, charged silence, the kind that precedes a lightning strike. I spent the weekend in a state of calm anticipation. I tended my garden, I baked a lemon pound cake, I attended church on Sunday. I was preparing my home and my soul for the storm I knew was coming. I was no longer afraid. I was ready. The call came on Monday evening just as I was sitting down to watch the evening news. The name on the caller ID was David. I let it ring 3 times, took a slow, deep breath and answered, my voice perfectly level. "Hello, David." "Mama," he shrieked, his voice a raw, hysterical torrent of disbelief and rage. There was no greeting, no preamble. Just pure, undiluted panic. "What is this? What in God's name is this? We got a letter from some lawyer. Bill. For $48,000. Is this a joke? Are you suing us?" I held the phone slightly away from my ear, letting the initial wave of his fury wash over me without touching me. I recognized the tone. It was the sound of a man whose carefully constructed world had just been shattered. It was the sound of fear. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke, my voice a calm, serene island in the ocean of his hysteria. "No, David," I said quietly. "I'm not suing you. I am billing you." "Billing me?" he sputtered, the word foreign in his mouth. "Billing me for what? For being a grandmother? For spending time with your own family?" "No," I corrected him gently but with a spine of steel. "I am billing you for my labor. For the 1,980 hours of professional childcare I have provided over the past 6 years. For the housekeeping. For the meal preparation. And for the damages incurred when I was forced to sacrifice my own health for your convenience. You said I needed to pull my own weight. I simply wanted you to see precisely how much that weight is worth in dollars and cents. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing ragged and fast. I had taken his narrative, the one where he was the hard-working provider and I was the dependent, lazy mother, and I had flipped it on its head. I had used the language of his world, the world of billable hours and bottom lines, to expose the truth of mine. "Mama, you can't be serious," he finally whispered, his anger collapsing into a pathetic, desperate confusion. "This is insane. We can't pay this. You'll ruin us." "Whether you can pay it is between you, your wife, and your banker," I replied, my voice devoid of sympathy. "My concern is only with the debt that is owed. A gift, David, is given freely and accepted with gratitude. When the gratitude is absent and the gift is taken for granted and then insulted, it is no longer a gift. It is a service. And services require payment." I could hear Tiffany shouting in the background, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss. "This is her fault. I told you she was manipulative. Tell her we're not paying a dime." David's voice returned, infused with a fresh dose of his wife's indignation. "We're not paying this, Mama. It's extortion." "It is not extortion, David. It is a legally sound claim for services rendered," I stated, quoting Ms. Okoro's exact words. The authority in my voice was absolute. "You are a lawyer. You know what quantum merit means. If you and Tiffany choose not to settle this invoice, Ms. Okoro has been instructed to file a lawsuit in the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. I imagine the partners at your firm would be very interested to learn that one of their junior associates is being sued by his own elderly mother for financial exploitation. It's not a good look, as Tiffany would say." That was the kill shot. I had aimed my weapon directly at the most vulnerable part of him. His career, his ambition, his desperate need for approval from his superiors. A messy, public lawsuit would be a permanent stain on his reputation. It would be the end of his climb up the corporate ladder. He was silent. The only sound was the frantic, whispered conversation between him and his wife. He had no defense. He had no leverage. He had built his life on a foundation of my sacrifice, and I had just presented him with the bill for the materials and labor. "What do you want, Mama?" he finally asked, his voice small and defeated. He sounded like a little boy again, but this time it did not stir my heart. It only filled me with a profound, sorrowful sense of finality. "I want what is owed," I said. "That is all. From now on, any and all communication regarding this matter must go through my attorney, Ms. Adana Okoro. She will be expecting your lawyer's call." I did not wait for his reply. I did not want to hear his pleas, his bargains, his empty, desperate apologies. The time for that was over. The woman he was trying to appeal to, the soft-hearted, endlessly forgiving mother, no longer existed. In her place was a client. A creditor. A woman who knew her value. "I have to go now, David," I said, my voice soft but final. "I have a pre-op appointment to prepare for." And with that I hung up the phone. I pressed the end call button and cut the toxic cord that had bound me to him for so long. My hand was perfectly steady. The storm had broken and I was still standing. In the quiet of my living room, I felt a sense of peace so deep and so profound it was almost holy. The house of cards they had so arrogantly built was collapsing in on itself. And the foundation they had taken for granted, was finally beautifully free. The aftermath was not a dramatic courtroom battle. David and Tiffany were far too concerned with appearances for that. A public lawsuit, with its depositions and discoveries, would have aired all their dirty laundry for the partners at David's firm, and the whole of Charlotte's elite, to see. The story of the rising young lawyer and his stylish wife who exploited their elderly mother would have been a social and professional death sentence. They had no choice but to capitulate. Their lawyer, a man from a firm as slick and corporate as David's, contacted Ms. Okoro's office the very next day. There was some initial blustering, some talk of familial duty, and moral obligation. Ms. Okoro, as she later recounted to me, shut it down with icy precision. She informed him that familial duty is a two-way street and that moral obligation does not include forcing one's mother to cancel surgery and then calling her lazy. She made it clear that we were prepared to file the lawsuit by the end of the week if a settlement was not reached. The negotiation was swift. They couldn't pay the full $48,500 without selling their precious house, but they settled on a figure that was substantial enough to be painful. The final amount was $35,000. It required them to drain their savings, sell Tiffany's gleaming white Range Rover, and cancel their membership at the expensive country club they had just joined. The settlement was not just a financial transaction. It was a dismantling of the facade they had worked so hard to build. It was a tangible consequence, a price they had to pay for their disrespect. The check, written from their lawyer's trust account, arrived at Ms. Okoro's office a week before my surgery. When she called to tell me, I felt not a surge of triumph but a quiet, somber sense of justice. The money itself was secondary. What mattered was the acknowledgement, the valuation. They had been forced, by the power of the law and the strength of my resolve, to put a number on my worth. On the day of my surgery, I went into the MUSC hospital in Charleston with a light heart. As they wheeled me into the operating room, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was not just fixing my knee, I was healing my life. I had severed the toxic limb of my son's entitlement and was finally taking care of myself. The recovery was arduous. There was pain, there was grueling physical therapy, there was the slow, frustrating process of teaching my body how to move again. But this pain was different. This was a productive pain, a healing pain. It was the pain of reconstruction, not the pain of neglect. Each small victory, bending my knee another degree, taking a step without the walker, climbing a single stair, was a testament to my own strength and resilience. David tried to call a few times during my recovery. I never answered. He sent a bouquet of flowers to my house with a card that read, "Thinking of you, Mama." I donated the flowers to the nurses' station at the physical therapy center. His gestures were too little, too late. They were the desperate acts of a son trying to reclaim a mother he had already lost. The bridge between us had been burned, not by my anger but by his disrespect. My silence was not a punishment. It was a boundary. It was the sound of my peace, a peace he was no longer welcome to disturb. Months passed. The seasons changed. The sharp, surgical pain in my knee faded, replaced by a new, unfamiliar sensation. Strength. Stability. Freedom. One bright spring morning, I walked out my front door and into my garden. I knelt, for the first time in over a decade, on a soft cushion and began to weed the azalea beds. I could feel the cool, rich soil under my fingers. I could smell the sweet fragrance of the blossoms. And I could move without pain. I worked for hours, my body strong, my spirit light. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, I stood up, brushing the dirt from my trousers. I stood unassisted and walked without a limp up the steps to my porch. I sat on my swing, the gentle creak a familiar lullaby, and looked out at the world I had reclaimed. My legacy, I realized in that moment, was not the ungrateful son I had raised or the career he had built on my aching bones. My legacy was this garden. It was this haint blue house. It was the quiet strength I had found in my darkest hour. It was the profound, unshakable knowledge that a woman's work, whether it is raising a child, running a business, or simply caring for herself, always has value. It is not negotiable. And sometimes when the world tries to tell you you are worthless, you have to be willing to stand up on your own 2 feet and hand them the bill. And that truth, that hard-won, beautiful truth, was worth more than any price. It was everything.